Thank you for those who have joined today and for those who are listening on the recording. What I wanted to do today with the Odaseva team is to share with you some stories and some use cases about the product that is Odaseva. So Odaseva is an enterprise-ready data compliance and data management tool that's been built for the Force.com platform. And from a personal point of view, I started working with Odaseva in 2018, where we have rolled out and continue to roll out Odaseva to a client in the UK. We initially had the tool rolled out as a backup and archiving product, but we're now extending it to GDPR compliance and other data management aspects. So from using the tool, I think it could be a real enabler for our deliveries. It can also be used as an accelerator for some of our deliveries and is definitely value add for our clients. So today we're going to share with you what the product can offer and some use cases that you can consider for your own clients. And in terms of what I'd like people to try and take away from today. So first of all, I'd like you to understand what can Odaseva offer our customers at a high level. Number two, some practical use cases that could help our customers today. And number three, who to contact for more information if you have a requirement that you think could be met by Odaseva. So I think with that, I will hand over to Vincent and Kevin for the next part.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So this is Vincent speaking. I'm the Chief Growth Officer and co-founder at Odaseva. I joined Odaseva a year ago after almost 10 years at Salesforce. And I'm happy to have with us Kevin, who runs our solution engineering team out of San Francisco.
Hello, everyone.
So we have prepared a session for you today, which starts with a quick presentation on data governance as a service in Odaseva, and then we'll spend more time on the demonstrations and leave ample time for Q&A. So please feel free to ask your questions through the Zoom tool, and or keep your questions for later. Okay, so let's jump into it. Why data governance and why Odaseva? As all, I would say, IT professionals know, data governance is a critical need when you run IT. Whether in the cloud or not, you need to run data protection, data privacy compliance, and data operations. Now, what's happened in the past years or decades is people have focused on the difference between SaaS and PaaS and IaaS and on-prem. And the thing that most people have missed is that the only thing that's common within all those ways of consuming IT is that data remains customers' responsibility. And here comes the catch. Your customers chose to go to SaaS to focus on business, but they are faced with traditional data governance tools that really reduce the value of going to SaaS. And this is why Odaseva brings the data governance cloud for Salesforce. And I must say our relationship with Salesforce is very strong, and they most recently invested in Odaseva as another sign yet of the strong partnership we have with Salesforce. So what do? We are a data governance platform for the enterprise. We cover on one single platform those three use cases that are complementary: data protection, which is mostly backup, restore, and archiving, and data privacy compliance. And so this is about GDPR and other kind of vertical or industry-specific regulations. And then it's data operations, and Kevin will share a few examples later on. And what's specific about this platform is that it was built and meant for the enterprise from day on. So what you see below are the characteristics of the platform, and I want to walk you through a few examples of our customers to illustrate those. So the story started with Schneider Electric. It was 2012, and our CEO Sovan Bin and I had been working on Schneider Electric and sold them what was at the time one of the largest deals of Salesforce in history. And Schneider, after they deployed, realized that they were missing the control on data that they had with traditional SAP systems. And when they clarify their needs, they said that they needed the customizability and the completeness to support 45,000 users and 500,000 partner users. So this is how the Odaseva story started. It was with the requirements of one of the most complex Salesforce customers. Now, Robert Half is an interesting example, same industry as Michael Page, based in the US. They have 1.5 billion records in their Salesforce org, and that materialized in more than 3 weeks to just move data from Salesforce to their data lake. And obviously, when you take a snapshot over 3 weeks, the picture is going to be extremely blurry, and you'll face timeout issues and so on. And that was really a nightmare. And they were trying to do that, with traditional tools like Informatica. And so after they selected us, now they do this same, 3-week work in 7 hours. So that's an example of how performant our platform is. And if you have technical questions about how we reach that, happy to have Kevin answer those later on. Another aspect which is critical for enterprise customers is security. So this top 3 worldwide pharma company, when we first spoke with them, said, why don't you come back in 2 years after you comply with all our security rules? And at the time, Sovan was proud enough to say that he was already complying with those, because he had built in a 5-layer of AES 256 encryption, because from day one for the enterprise, he knew that having the highest level of encryption was a must, which means at Odaseva, we do not see the data of our customers. It is encrypted by them, and that gives them the assurance that they can rely on us to trusting us with their most precious asset, their data. Another aspect which is important is the one-stop shop. Kevin White was talking earlier on about the Page Group, which we have been working on. And Page Group selected us initially for backup and data operations, but they also knew that GDPR was coming down the road. And a few months later, this is something that they have already purchased from us, and that we are implementing as we speak together with Capgemini. Another topic that is critical for the enterprise is having a central data governance. And General Electric, probably one of the most decentralized companies in the world, they have more than 100 Salesforce orgs at GE. They like that with Odaseva, they can have this visibility on data across orgs. Covea is the last example I would take. Covea, we are working on together with Capgemini. And Covea is an interesting example because they actually selected us before, or identified us before they decided to bet big on Salesforce. It's just a sign that the market is more mature than it was, and that customers are now aware and are looking for that on-prem grade data control for the cloud. So after all these stories, what makes us different? On the App Exchange, you will see that there are other solutions that exist, but I think we differentiate in a few points. Number one, we have a one-stop shop for the full control over your data. Number two, it's built for the enterprise, and that translates into performance, scalability, security, completeness. And then it's also specifically about GDPR, whereas other backup solutions with GDPR wash themselves. We actually are the only solution on the App Exchange that provides GDPR data manipulation automation on the production org. And Kevin is going to show that in a few minutes. And last but not least, it's also about the expertise and methodology. A tool is a tool, and it's really a full-blown approach that we bring. And we love to partner with strong SIs that can really do the job with us in the field and provide maximum value to our customers. So today we have, I think, more than 3 million Salesforce users actually, and across a number of verticals. We are in Paris, San Francisco, New York, and that's where I will stop for the quick presentation about Odaseva. So I will hand it over to Kevin Spouts for demonstrations.
All right, thank you, Vincent. So yeah, if you have any question on the presentation, we'll do a large and ample Q&A at the end of the whole presentation. So, but let's just first dive into the demos. So the demos today, we're going to look at 3 things that we thought with Kevin that was interesting to you. So first, we're going to talk about sandbox initialization and anonymization of sandboxes. You'll see how we are able to copy data, maintain relationship when we create that data over, and how we can also anonymize all of this. Then we're going to look at the GDPR capabilities. So we talked about it, it's part of our data compliance suite. And here the idea will be to show you how an automatic routine will automatically remove personal data from your production environment. And then finally, we're going to look at sampling data, and it's kind of like more of a looking ahead for you to get you thinking about what you could do with Odaseva, showing that we can select data based on very granular variables into your production environment and move this over and do some transformation over. And that can apply to any managed package that any source of data that you actually have. So first, let's look at the data ops case, which is initializing a sandbox. So the use case really is how to refresh sandbox environments, how to anonymize test data. In general, though, what we see is a lot of time this is used by our customers for initializing training sandboxes, and I'm especially thinking of it for you. As you are deploying large Salesforce developments for your customers, maybe it could be interesting to use that tool to say, well, here's the data set that I've created on one sandbox, and I'm going to replicate it to 10 other sandboxes for a specific training. We do the same at Odaseva when we do training. And you can refresh those 10 sandboxes many times if you're doing large training for 30, 40 people or something like this. And you can port over any data that you have on the side. You can also think about it in another way, and I'm going to show you the anonymized part, which is how can you remove personal data from development environments. If you're working with multiple developers across the globe, you might not want to be showing all of that personal data to them, even though you want to keep some of the relationships and some of the actual data to be able to test effectively the developments that you are making. So the key things here, you'll see that it's a one-click trigger, or it's actually just an API call. We also have a customer API that is also integrated with the Salesforce DX package. So you could do that everything from the command line, from an API call, or from the web app. You'll see that we are actually able to do a carve out of the production data model, but in that case, we are really going to copy a full data set, and I'll show you how, and that we have different anonymization patterns. So let's move over to that demo. So you see here, I'm on an empty dev sandbox. So I'm just refreshing to make sure it's empty. Yep, it is. So all account, there's nothing in there. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull data in it. So here it's pretty simple. I have basically just a routine here that is going to pull an image, a data set that we have in high retention, high durability in our vaults. At Odaseva, it's something that we have created ahead of time, which is a full picture of a sandbox. And so, by the way, just an overview of the screen that you're seeing right now. On the left, on Odaseva, you have all of the products that are available to you. Here we are on the screen, which is a specific job. And more than a job in that context, it's an actual routine that we have configured. We call that macros. And macros can be as simple as one, and we will see more complex macros with the rest of the demos. So now I'm just going to run this, and it's going to run that template that is over here. And as you see, once I've run this, what's going on in here is it's actually creating a new job based on the template that is here, and it's going to execute whatever parameters I have in those. So as I said, those parameters are to go and look for a data set that we have stored in Odaseva. You can store many data sets there for training A, training B, training C, training A with some variables in them, etc., etc. And we do that. We do just that even for us when we do our training. So we have launched the full restore. So if I refresh the page, let's see if it's completed. There we go. Yeah, it's completed. So if I go back to Salesforce here and I refresh, you will see that I have ported over all of the data that was in my data set. And so I can navigate, and you'll see that you have the full relationship that have been maintained. You have all of the data, you have the relationship, you have opportunities, you have contacts. And what we're going to show now is that we've ported over some personal data. So you have here a specific contact, we have his name, we have his email address, we have his mailing address, and we don't want that to be there because that sandbox is going to be used for developers that are not part of the company, that are not part of our development team. So we want to remove all of that personal data. So we're going to switch over to a more complex macro, and that's the macro where we do anonymization. And so I'm going to run this, and I will go through it to explain to you what exactly we do. So basically what we do here is we are going to extract the specific the specific objects and fields that contain personal data. We are going to transform that data based on anonymization patterns that we have set. So if I get in here and look at the detail of the job, you'll see that we have different anonymization patterns for first name, last name, emails, birthday. It could be really complex. Here we kept it pretty simple because it's just a simple demo, but you could do that across multiple objects, across multiple fields, custom fields and standard fields, and you can customize yourself exactly what those anonymization rules are. So if you have any validation rules that are preventing you to do any of those anonymization, then you can really go around them with the anonymization patterns that we have. Then what we do is we update that data into Salesforce. So we load it back into Salesforce. And then we extract the data that we actually want to delete, because some of the data we not only want to change and anonymize, we actually want to delete. So things like case comments, contact attachments, case history, those things are going to be deleted. And we have the option with Odaseva to delete data in production. The only thing that you need to do before you delete it is you actually need to have a copy to provide for the Salesforce IDs of what you need to delete, but also to make sure that you're not deleting something you don't have a copy of. So if we go back to that environment and we refresh, obviously here we should see that Jean Dupont has been completely anonymized, and that's the case. You see that his name has been anonymized, his title has been anonymized. We've kept, business info. It's still related to Air France. And if we navigate to Air France, we see that we still have the opportunities, but all of the contacts have been anonymized. And so because it's a full sandbox anonymization here, we want to look at all of the contacts that are here and check that we don't have any remaining contact that is actually not anonymized. And you see that all of them have been completely removed. So that's great. Now you can actually give that sandbox to your developers, and they will be able to run all of those tests, have some consistent data relationships that are really relevant and real, that are coming from production. But at the same time, you have anonymized data, so you're not leaking any personal data. So that was the first demo. So really here is the value in the end is better testing, better confidentiality with those sandboxes.
And Kevin, if you don't mind me just saying, so in our latest ISMS policies, which is a Capgemini global security standard, we actually have it as a non-functional requirement that we have no PII data or live data in any of our test environments. So from a compliance point of view, it's very key to have a tool like Odaseva to be able to meet that compliance requirement very quickly rather than having to script all of this ourselves.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I didn't know about that requirement. So what's great here is that actually you could work among each other to define what are those anonymization patterns that you want to be standard at Capgemini, and input that into Odaseva, and that's it. Then you just have to run it on each of your sandboxes, and it will be done. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing, Kevin. So
maybe a quick question regarding anonymization. Would it be possible to do pseudonymization, which is using the exact same randomizing thing on the data on multiple systems that are interconnected, so that there's a relevant connected system line, in fact, which for the same contact, it's the same random that have been done on Salesforce through Odaseva on, let's say, a master data for the clients and so on?
Yeah, so actually we can. And so we have a gradient of data and information removal that you can apply. So anonymization, as you've seen here, we were doing basically removing completely the value with random characters. So that's the maximum you can do. But then we have predictive anonymization. We have actual pseudonymization, as you just said, with like MD5 hash, so like one-way hashing, those type of things that actually can do this. And it's really a matter of the legal team of our customers when they're doing this. What are they confident in keeping, even because predictive anonymization is not full anonymization, obviously. And so in that context, the idea is what are they confident in keeping? And so sometimes they want to keep some information. Maybe, for example, they actually want to keep the city and the country because they are doing reporting against that, and they don't want to have their reporting now showing people that are customers of them in China or something like this, right? So they want to keep some consistency, but that still won't be able to lead back to the individual that was there before. So everything is possible, and we have, I think, 45 anonymization pattern, including those pseudonymization pattern. So we have all the documentation in Odaseva. So definitely once you'll start looking into this, you'll see that we are more than ready to welcome any of those requirements. So let's move on to the GDPR lifecycle. So the GDPR lifecycle, the same logic that we've seen with anonymization. Here, the idea is to apply it to a single record tree. And so the single record tree is one individual in Salesforce. And that individual can do two things in the context of GDPR. He can request his data and also request to be forgotten. And so what we're looking at here with the lifecycle is not the request to be forgotten, but the automatic way of forgetting someone after his consent has expired. So that individual could be a lead, for example, or someone that came to your website and you have gathered information about that individual. It didn't go further than this. They did not become a customer or anything. But after 2 years of consent, you need to automatically remove that data. And we find it's actually more of a direct requirement that our customers need to do, more than the right to be forgotten, where sometimes some of those companies don't have a lot of requests for right to be forgotten, so could potentially still go manually and do it. When we talk about consent management, and the action of content management once we have started tracking the content, this is where it starts to get really difficult to manage the volume of data that we're talking about. So here we have a solution which is an automatic routine that is running every day or every week, depending on the customer. Most of the time it's every week. And that is looking for those contacts, those individuals for which their content has expired. And so it's automatically going to go through the object tree from that contact or from that lead, depending on where we start the object tree, and going to do an anonymization of all of this. So let's show this. So once again, I'm here on Salesforce, and you see that I'm on an account. So that account is in Germany, so it's under GDPR. And we're going to navigate to that contact, Stephanie Vaughan over here. So that contact, we see we have a picture, we have a phone number, we have an email, a birthday. At the same time, we have cases, we have opportunities, we have generated revenue. And so the big question that our customers have is, how do we differentiate between what is personal data and what is business data? And so we actually have a diagram to show that to you that can explain really well what we're doing at this stage. And so when we talk about a record tree, it can start from lead, it can start from contact, and then we go down and we look at all of the objects that are related. Some of these objects may contain personal data, and those are shown in blue, and so we need to anonymize these fields. Some of these objects we don't really know, and they're not really important, so we actually prefer removing everything that is inside them. So for example, attachments, sure, it could be something related to the business, but it also could be just the resume of that person. And you know, we work with page group, and so definitely in that context, it's going to be resume of those persons. And then you have objects that are typically business data and that you don't want to touch at all, but you don't want to keep them alone. And if you were to remove the contact completely, you would be removing that business data as well. So you want to maintain those records relationship, but just remove really what is personal data and keep all of the business data. And so here, if we go back to our example, what is business data is going to be those opportunities. It's going to be that revenue. It's going to be those cases, because we are reporting against those cases to actually have performance for our service team. But the content of those cases, we need to empty, we need to remove. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to set the date of expiry to today here. And we're going to run on Odaseva, we're going to run that macro that now you're familiar with that view, that personal data lifecycle macro. And so it's a scheduled macro that's running every day in the morning, but we're going to force it now. So I'm going to run it manually. And what it's going to do is it's going to look for it's going to first update, you know, the date of run of the macro. It's going to look for the contacts where their expiring date is before today. So basically everything that is in the past that is waiting to be forgotten. We are going to transform with the anonymization pattern that you've seen before, but very specific to that context. We're going to load it, and same as from before, what we're going to do is we are going also to delete the case command, delete the attachment, delete the case history. And we add one last part because this was a production environment. So we have backups of that individual, and we're going to remove that individual from the backup. So we call that forget from backup in the end, so that we remove really that person, and that person cannot be restored. It's actually a big topic in all of this, because if you don't have any other industry requirements, that's the way to go. You're not supposed to have any more information about that individual. However, if you're under, you know, financial requirements, or maybe you have started a commercial relationship with that person, so you have quotes, you have billing going on, you had billing going on with them, you have some laws that actually require you to keep that data for 7 years for audit purposes. So instead of doing forget from backup, we could also add another layer here that would be commit all of that data to a long-term archival retention, but that will be completely removed from production and only accessible to potential audits and financial audits in the case that this happens. So it's really, shipping the data to another place, but really removing the whole data from production in that context. So if I go back to my contacts here and I refresh, we will see the same thing that happened before, is we'll have completely anonymized that individual. And so here we have a more complex showcase of this, where we have the cases that have been maintained, but obviously have been completely anonymized. We don't have any information in those cases. We have opportunities that actually have been kept with all of that amount. We have the generated revenue that has been kept here, but all of the rest have been removed. And it's a good way to show you the different patterns that we can apply. You see that we have completely random characters here. We have a fixed value for the phone. We have a fixed value for the title. We have a dictionary here being used, and that dictionary can also be predictive. We do predictive dictionary if you need to. The birth date, it's been randomized, but it's still in the format of a date. You see that we have removed the street, but we have kept, the actual city and zip code as we talked about. And we have added some information, like for example, now it's actually forgotten. So it can be it can be automatically removed from certain reports that you want to do based on a tag that is right here. So that's it for that demo of GDPR data lifecycle. It's really useful for customers because all of this would have been required to be done manually, or if they wanted an automated solution, it would have been to build something on top of Salesforce API. Here they can just go and purchase Odaseva, configure the few elements that we talked about, what scope of personal data do they have in their system, and what anonymization pattern do they want to do, and they can be up and running on that GDPR requirements very quickly. So the last part that we have here is data sampling. And so this is where I want you to project a bit more into what I've shown you. And basically what we've shown here is that we're able to get into production, do what we call sub queries or up queries from a specific record, so that if we have a set of top records, we're able to navigate below them by selecting really the relationships and that we want to navigate through. We show that it's all automated, that we can save a specific data set in Odaseva, and that we can go and load it into a specific dev environment, and that we can also transform that data. We showed that with anonymization, but obviously that transformation can be done with any type of value. And so I think what makes sense in your case, especially at Capgemini, is when you work on specific package migration, whether it's stuff that you have developed yourself or whether you're using managed packages like CPQ, like Health Cloud, like Financial Cloud, those type of things, you are working with essentially data that you need to port over, configuration data that you need to port over, or specific data that you need to port over. And this with Odaseva, it's completely done. And that's where we really want to give you the keys of those tools in saying, well, if you can select, if you can apply your knowledge of specific data models and create those routines that you've just seen, to do whatever use case you have in mind, like porting over configuration data for CPQ, then you can really accelerate your deployment time, your test time, and really improve the project with your customers. And so I will show you just that. So I'm going to go back to my dev environment. So you remember my dev, we have just anonymized it. So with Odaseva, now we're going to empty that dev environment. So I'm going to go back in my macro, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate through different, you see, I can have multiple macros in store and run whichever I want. So I'm going to run the mass delete dev first. It's going to be right here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do what we call data sampling. So it's this demo that is over here. And so for this, basically what we're going to do is we're going to pull live data from one environment based on specific variables and put it into the second environment. So if I go back to my other sandbox that serves as a production environment here, and I list all of the accounts, you see that we have added a sampling tag over here. And so the goal is going to be to get all of these accounts with their object tree over to the other sandbox that have been emptied. So only the one that I've marked as sampling and that are tagged as sampling. So if I go here and I refresh this, now it should be empty. We have emptied the whole sandbox. All right. So we here on the data sampling, I'm going to run that macro. And we're going to look at what's going on inside it as usual. And to show you that it's actually, there's no crazy magic. We're not faking it. It's actually exactly this. We look for account where sampling underscore C is true. So our custom field that is sampling has been tagged. And then what we're doing is we're doing what we call the subqueries, where from that specific account, we are navigating through the relationship of that account to pull all of the data that is associated with it. We are doing one transformation to that data before loading it into the dev sandbox, which is an anonymization. And here, anonymization is for the same purpose that we talked about before. We shouldn't show that to external developers, so we anonymize it on the go. But that transformation can also be thought if you were pulling over configuration data to just change some of those configuration variables to reflect the fact that you are now in a sandbox environment when you're copying it from production. So maybe changing the username, changing some of those parameters like this. And then we simply launch it into and load it into the destination environment. And we're going to do a compare, and I will show you what the compare shows. All right, so even the compare is done. So let's first look at what actually has been ported over. So if I refresh on that side here, we'll see that we have pulled over only the account that were tagged as sampling. And if we navigate through those, so for example, this one, we'll see that we have maintained relationship. We still have cases, we still have opportunities, we have contacts, but actually those contacts are not the same. They have been anonymized. And so here we are using a dictionary, and we will validate that by simply looking at the compare that I've just talked about. So the compare in Odaseva is a way to compare two data sets, whether it's two live environments between each other, whether it's two backups, whether it's one backup and a live environment. It's basically comparing those. So we're going to look at the comparison here. And we see that we have indeed ported 7 accounts that were in the source environment, and we have 7 accounts in the target environments. However, we have a match percentage of only 84%. So let's look at what's going on in there. We can see that the billing is different, and you see that it's always different. So we have New York in the source and Mount Healthy. That's an example that is extracted from here in the destination. Same for the billing country. Same for the shipping country, same for the phone. And this shows the anonymization pattern that we have applied here that shows that we are indeed doing a transformation between those two. If I go back to the main view and I look at the contact should be the same, and they should not be, indeed, they should show that the first name and last name has been anonymized. And because we are using a dictionary, then those look exactly like first name and last name, even though they have been changed. So that's it for that demo. you can see that here we have not only a lot of value in just porting over data, but we have also a lot of value just in the comparison here. So when you want to compare configuration data between two environments to figure out what is different between those two and what you need to port over, you can do those comparisons. And by the way, if there was if there is any difference, what's great with Odaseva is that compare data can actually be used itself in a load, and we will all do port over only the difference of those two data sets to be ported over to the next sandbox. So really great to align, configuration data between environments and those type of things. So that's it for the demos. We've looked at sandbox initialization and anonymization. We looked at GDPR data lifecycle, and we looked at sampling data, but overall really the data operations, how you move data left and right, and how that can be applied to any type of data, especially configuration data in your context. So it's time to open it for the Q&A. Vincent, if you're still here, we will be taking all of your questions now. And I think everyone was muted, so you can unmute yourself if you have any questions.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin, for the demos. I think there was a first question from Kevin Gossent. Kevin, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I've written them, but that's perfect. Oh, sorry. I thought I was putting them to everyone. So my first one would be regarding performance, both on backup and restore. I've seen for the moment really insights on the backup side of the possibility to have 100 million records per hour, which is pretty great. And what of the restore? Because I have in mind the limitations, for example, for the bulk APIs and all, and that's why I'm thinking about that.
It's a good question. So performance. So first, let me say something, which is we have the most optimized solution for performance that you can find out there. We beat every competition on the market, and then I'll go explain what's in the source. But first, that's really important to understand is we do that, and the most important while achieving that performance is to also monitor and make sure that we don't go over the governor limits, and so of your customers. So it's really a fine line to walk between performance and over performance that is going to go over the governor limits and really block the environments of your customers. So what we do, the first part that we do is we rely on parallelization. So by default, we do 10 levels of parallelization, which is recommended by Salesforce as the maximum limits to do. But some of our customers have exemptions from Salesforce, and so we can go to 20, 35 levels of parallelization. And then what do we put in those different parallelization? So that's the question of the API. So by default, the REST API is 1 million records per hour. The bulk API is 10 million records per hour. So if you have 10 levels of parallelization and you have only bulk API, then it's already 100 million records per hour. If we are going beyond that, then you can go even more crazy. And what's interesting is what we found out is with certain optimization of parameters, especially on the bulk side, that we've worked on directly with Salesforce at the time to optimize all of those requests, we are able to go way beyond those 10 million records per hour of the bulk API on very large data models, and we can hit 100 or 150 million records per hour with the right parameters there. So everything of that is really handled by Odaseva. The other part that you probably know is when you're pulling a lot of data, you have a lot of chances of that request timing out or having an issue and not finishing completely, etc., etc. So all of that also includes a retry strategy, so an automatic retry strategy for Odaseva to do all of those. So that retry strategy plus the parallelization makes us really have like the best speed possible. And then we automatically optimize for which API to use, whether it's the REST API and the bulk API. And we have a matrix of decision around here, which is how many API calls does that customer actually have in bulk and have in REST? Because we could definitely consume a lot of REST calls because those customers are not using it a lot. But the bulk APIs calls are limited to 10,000, so you cannot go over this. So we would optimize for the REST for doing most of it on the REST API, but do a lot of parallelization here as well. So it really depends, but in the end, we managed to achieve like the fastest time in the restore, in the backup, sorry. And in the restore, that was the other part, is some objects need to be restored in the sequential mode because you need to restore one object first before restoring the other in order to have the relationship. And some others we can do in parallelization. And so what we do is the system automatically analyze the data set that we're restoring to find the logic between all of those records and the relationship between all of those records. So it's pretty smart. And it's going to make different batches that are going to be restored at the same time. If one fails because we're waiting on another record because we didn't detect that, it's not an obvious relationship. It's a custom object, a custom field, etc. Then we're just going to fail that and retry later on with at the next batch. But basically, you have a maximum optimization of batches that are going to be sent at the same time on the restore to make sure that this restoration is quick as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and it gives, in fact, the one additional regarding the governor limits. Are you constrained by the client's governor limits, or are you in a separate count, like the Ohana app exchanges and all that are on a specific count for the clients?
So at this time, we are on the client governor limit. So on those 10,000 bulk API limits that you know, and the REST API that corresponds to the number of licenses that they have purchased and type of licenses that they have purchased. But this is an interesting question because it's we're working on that.
Thanks.
Kevin, there's a question from Demi about macros. How do you sequence them, and can sequences be changed?
Oh yeah, definitely. So when building macros, and it's something that we'd love to do with you, is definitely the thing is at Odaseva, everything that we do and we have packaged into solutions is also broken down as basic tools to use. And so all of those basic jobs, so whether it's an extraction job, a load job, a transform job, an update job, a delete job, I mean, I can go over for 15 or 25 jobs, something like this that we have in the platform. All of those can be added to macros with specific parameters, and you can change the order very simply and change whatever information we get from the previous job that was executed. And another part is we use macros also for backup plan. And so we've shown here that they can be sequenced. So you run the first one, you wait for the first one to be done, and then you go and you execute the second one, or everything can be launched at the same time. So if you're doing a massive extraction, for example, you could launch everything at the same time with that macro. So it's a different mode that you activate for the macro in that context.
All right. I think there may be time for a last question before we hand it over to Kevin White for closing remarks. Anybody has a question?
I'd have one which is more commercial.
Go ahead.
In fact, for a client in which I'm working on, they would like to be able to make a proof of concept with different providers. Odaseva would be one for the backup, restore, and so on, and who to call on your side to be able to make a first call with them and so on. That's based in France on the energy.
Okay, so consider me. That's a great question. So, Kevin, if you move to the next slide, I think our details are on the last slide. Those are resources, by the way.
Resources for you.
Yeah. Okay, that's probably okay. The one is missing for Kevin. So consider me. You have my email address. Consider me as your go-to person, as I lead the alliance part, and then I would point you to our teams. So we have a sales team out of France that covers Europe, and we also have a team in the US. So I would be happy to make the connections.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Kevin White, maybe a closing remark?
Yeah, sure. So Vincent and Kevin, thank you very much. I found that really useful. I hope that others did as well. In terms of what I sort of asked people to think about, to take away from today. So first of all, what Odaseva offers our customers at a high level. So that's the capability for data compliance, data operations and data management, all from one platform. And then there are some of those other additional features that are very interesting, particularly in regulated markets, like the level of encryption available. The second thing I asked you to take away was some practical use cases. So we saw Kevin demonstrate the sandbox anonymization, and then also look at some of the options when it came to restore jobs and anonymization from a GDPR perspective. Then in terms of who to contact for more information, that's the slide that Vincent's showing here. So I hope that everyone found this useful. And yeah, I'd urge you to contact Vincent or myself if you need any more information.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Kevin. Thank you for inviting us over.
Yeah, thank you all. And let's talk soon and do some business together.
Brilliant.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.